All right, welcome into the high school baseball preview for Southwest Louisiana for the playoffs. It's the quarterfinal round as it starts later this week. As always, we've got a ton of teams left. Alex Armand from Prep Baseball Report. So good of us to join us for the second straight year to preview all these teams. Last year we did the whole playoffs. We've kind of narrowed the focus a little bit with so many teams down to just the quarterfinal round. Welcome, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brady. I'm excited to be here, and I think, like I was telling you before we jumped on, it's kind of like March Madness for me, and I'm sure with all the other sports as well. But definitely for me, just trying to run around and see everybody, and I'm excited to see how this stretch run goes.
Yeah, so many teams. I mean, 11 teams, and it's kind of surprising none of them actually play each other this year. Usually we have a couple of still matchups, but we had most of them in the second round. So a lot of our teams still with their eyes on their semifinal round over at Sulphur as usual, except for this year it's a little bit different. St. Louis actually will play their games at Sulphur in the quarterfinal round, kind of at least still getting a taste of McMurray Park before they'll obviously head east for the championship game if they're able to make it that far. Semifinals, though, would still be likely at McMurray or possibly McNeese. So we'll ultimately see what happens there if they're able to win. Before we get into the brackets and everything, Prep Baseball Report's really grown. PBR Louisiana, it feels like over the last few years and what you guys have been able to do. How have you kind of seen you guys grown, and what do you feel like that you guys really helped do for the state of Louisiana baseball?
Yeah, so I think Prep Baseball Report's been around at least in Louisiana since 2015. And I'd say probably the first 2 or 3 years, it was really just a company that was focused on running events like showcases and tournaments to help players with, player exposure and getting to the next level. So over the last, 3 years, certainly the last couple years that I've been doing it, we've still been doing that, but there's been a greater focus on during the high school season, getting out across, the state to the different games to actually see these players in action, playing for their high schools. This is something I talk to people a lot about. You can see players in a, quote unquote showcase type of atmosphere versus playing for their schools and their communities against district rivals, and there's a different intensity to it. So we can't be everywhere at once, but we've tried to get everywhere across the state, and ultimately help players, like I said, get to the next level, whether that's junior college or Division 3 or Division 1. So yeah, we're just gonna keep trying to see as many players as possible.
I know it's not y'all's main focus, but it really feels like that you guys tried to fill a need that services like 24/7 Sports or On Three or Rivals um, doesn't really provide, and that's recruiting tools, especially for the public for high school baseball.
Right. And, it brings up another good point. I mean, in college baseball right now, you can only have two paid assistant coaches, right? And usually one of them is, the recruiting coordinator. Well, during this time of year, they're playing games, not only on the weekend, their conference series, but midweek games. I mean, those guys have to have a life too. They have to go home and see their families. So, yeah, we like to think, we could be an extension of them, or like you said, provide, some sort of service as a stopgap for them and say, hey, man, I saw this kid or this kid this week. Think you should take a look at them. So yeah, it's definitely a good point.
Yeah, and you mentioned the recruiting. We talked about the recruiting rankings. As always, this area is kind of loaded. We touched on it last year, and lo and behold, it doesn't really seem like there's been a ton of movement there in the top five. Last year, we got obviously Gavin Gidry for this upcoming class, the number one player. No shock there, obviously from Barb headed to LSU. Ethan Fry as well to LSU from Rosebine, and then Tyler Lejeune, however you'd want to kind of say it, depends on where you're from, I guess. Iota High School. This time last year, he was still committed to LSU. Obviously, flipped his commitment there with Arizona. Three of the top five just from this area.
Yeah, three of the top five just from this area. And yeah, it's no accident that three of the top five are from this area. I think if you look at the other classes as well, the 23s and 24s, there's quite a bit, um, from this area as well. And I don't think that trend will change anytime soon.
Yeah, speaking of 23, the number two overall player, Jake Brown from Sulphur, the pitcher, J.C. Vanek from Barb. all at an LSU commit as well as Brown. And then Dylan Thompson, another LSU commit. Seems to be a trend there. Sam Houston High School, he comes in at number 6 right now. And then in 24, Landon Victorian, who has a chance to be a really, really special player. We've seen it this year. The pitcher for Barb, ranked as the y'all's number one player here in the state.
Yeah, and what's really cool about those guys that you mentioned is they all play in the same district against each other during the year. Barb, Sam Houston, and Sulphur. All those guys, great players. I think Landon's still the only one who's uncommitted, but he has offers from everywhere in the country. And he's Landon. We'll get to him, I'm sure, when we talk about Barb. But he's a guy that's definitely taken a big jump forward this year.
For sure. And speaking of, let's start the previews, man. In Class 5A, all 3 of our teams still alive. None are playing each other, which means maybe a repeat of 2018 when all 3 teams got to Sulphur and were playing in the semifinals. That's when we saw Sam Houston and Sulphur match up in the semis, and then Barb played Central. Unfortunately, we couldn't have an all-championship game, but it was still fun to see them all there. And that was the game where we really kind of saw who Will Dion was for the first time at that stage and what he was able to do. He and Connor Cook both got drafted this past year, both helped lead their team to the state title. It was a huge coming out party for both for Sulphur. This year, though, Barb comes in once again as the number 1 seed. Little surprise, 32-2 record. I mean, just as dominant as what they were last year. They'll take on St. Amal there, the 28-6 Gators. Softball champions last weekend. So the last 2 softball champions as well, meeting on the baseball diamond. Obviously, no correlation there, though. Plenty of good stuff to like about this series.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good series. And when you look at all the 5A series, I mean, they're all historically really good, solid baseball programs in Louisiana, and that's what's exciting. So, St. Amant's got a couple of pitchers that Barb's going to face that are going to be really good. Both of them are Nicholls State commits, both right-handers. One's a senior, one's a junior. Both will run their fastball up to 90, 91. So this will be a good test for the Bucks. But I mean, as you mentioned, they only have 2 losses on the year. Again, pitching has really carried them with Gavin Guidry, of course. We know about him. J.C. Vanek's done a really good job. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Landon Victorian's been the one who's really taken that next step forward into becoming, an elite arm, I think. Just last weekend, he was up to 92. His breaking ball's really improved. So, it's St. Amant has a couple of good arms, but Barb's got good arms as well. And if they get to game 3, I like Barb's number 3 probably more than St. Amant's. And Barb swung the bats, well all year as well.
Yeah, and look, we mentioned it last year, and it feels like it's always a conversation. It almost feels like the structure, the way that we've structured the playoffs here in the state, is just about to benefit Barb of getting to the semifinals, because I'm not sure you're going to have any team that's going to be able to beat Gavin Guidry and Landon Victorian back-to-back games. So you're going to have to get through one of them, and then you're going to face their 3, which is probably better than what you've got too. So it kind of it's hard not to pencil them into at least the semifinals every year because of that. Those guys can be beaten at the high school level, sure. I mean, despite them being elite prospects, it's baseball. Anything can happen. We've seen Jack Walker lose a few years ago for them, lose a one-hitter. So we've seen those types of things. Even when they're dominant, you can still lose those games. But beating them back-to-back is a tough task.
Yeah, it's a tough ask. And, like when Jack Walker lost, that was in the regular season, and I think Jack ended up, I think he went the complete game or almost the complete game. To me, if you want to beat Barb, like you said, you're going to have to get into their bullpen, which is going to be extremely tough to do. So, yeah, you're right. With the way that it's set up, it's tough not to pencil them in for the semifinals.
Speaking of, obviously, elite teams there, Sulphur, a nice, real strong bounce-back year for them. They were kind of, I think they were a 17 seed. They dealt with injuries last year, and this year everything really clicked for them. The Tours are really kind of flexing their muscles this year. The number 4 seed, 27-7 year. And who do they get in the quarterfinals? Well, only arguably it's baseball royalty in 5A as well with what the Zachary Broncos have done. A bit of an off-year record-wise for them at 22-12, but obviously always a loaded team. What do you see in this matchup?
Yeah, yeah. First, the biggest thing for Sulphur, and you're right, them having this bounce back year is Jake Brown being healthy. Um, as you mentioned, he's our second ranked player in that 23 class, and he's been really, really good for Sulphur on the mound this year and with the bat hitting leadoff. But you're right, Zachary probably has been the hottest team in 5A this year since district play started. They play in that tough Baton Rouge. I think it's District 4 5A with, them, Live Oak, Central of Baton Rouge. And I really thought Central would win that district. And Zachary goes 9-1 and wins that district outright. And you're right, their record, they have double-digit losses, but I get, their power ratings and their strength of schedule. That's why they're the number 5 seed. So that matchup, Sulphur and Zachary, is going to be a battle. I feel like they're both very well coached teams. That's the thing about Zachary. They're not going to have the most talent on the field or the most college commitments, but they play the game the right way. They run the bases well. They get their bunts down. They hit behind runners. They don't strike out a lot. That's going to be a fun series.
I really like this Sulphur team to kind of reach it as well. Guys like Gabe Straha, Dylan Bird, Cole Navarre, Bryson Fontenot, as we talked. Runner-up in 2018, the year that we talked about there with Will Dion and company. But I kind of like Sulphur to advance past here just because of their pitching more than anything.
I do as well. And look, you talk about 2018, but as we're sitting here talking, it's bringing up past memories. I'm going to go back to 2015 whenever Barb and Sulphur met in the semifinals. Sulphur had a pretty good left-hander at the time named Cale Bro who threw. If everything shakes out how it should, we could see Jake Brown and Sulphur against Barb in the semifinals of McMurray, and that would maybe try to break some records from 2015 for attendance.
Boy, that'd be a lot of fun, huh? It would be. We could, if Guidry was the one to get on the bump, you'd see the top 2 players are, I guess, Jake Brown's number 2 and 23, but going head to head, it'd be a heck of a lot of fun. Meanwhile, talking all of those, and this was the year that Sam Houston took a step back in terms of the rankings. Obviously, still a loaded baseball team as they always are in program. 24-7 this year. They're on the road in the quarterfinals, something we don't see often for them. But on the road in the quarterfinals as they travel to a loaded West Monroe team full of, I believe, sophomores. In a few years, they'll have the best senior class in the state. But right now, a team loaded full of really high-end sophomores, the number 2 seed, 26-4 this year. This is going to be a series. I think it comes down to the run scoring. Can Sam Houston's powerful lineup continue to put up big runs? And because I think they'll need to be able to down West Monroe.
Yeah, you're right. And Sam Houston did have their early season struggles. I think probably trying to figure out what their pitching staff was going to look like, who was going to be the starters, who was going to come out of the pen. And it looks like that they've gotten those things shaken out. And you're right, that series I look for that series to be a high scoring type of series, 8-6, 9-7 type of games. Both teams have really potent lineups. I mean, with West Monroe, you've got, John Pearson, LSU commit, Hayden Federico, an Ole Miss commit. You got Trey Halsey, who's probably one of the top uncommitted hitters in that sophomore class. And then, Sam Houston, kind of like Barb, you could just go up and down the order from Sam Ardwan to Dylan Thompson to Andrew Glass, Ashton Fusler, Luke Uhas, Griffin Abear. I mean, the list goes on, right?
Yep.
That's, like I said, Brady, I mean, all those 5A series, they're going to be great in the quarterfinals. That one, I think, is going to be full of more offense.
Yeah, and I think that kind of benefits what Sam Houston does well is being able to swing the bats. I think if the games are 2-0, I don't think that they're going to benefit Sam Houston in the way that I'd like them being able to win a 9-7 game. Just the way that their lineup is structured, and you kind of mentioned their pitching staff. They don't have that dominant arm. They've got some guys that can pitch well, but that's not what they're going to be doing at the college level very likely. And so it'll be interesting to see what that team does. They were runner-up back in 2019, so the last time that they were a runner-up there, but obviously been the semis last year. I like all three's chances of those teams to kind of get to the semis, although it feels like we may only get 2 when it's all said and done, just because Zachary is a really good baseball team, and I think West Monroe is a really good team, and so I wouldn't be surprised if either of those teams are able to win. despite how good I think St. Amant is, like we talked about,
Yeah.
that elite rotation for Barb, I think it's going to be tough to drop him out in a 2-3 series.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you. And like I said, look, Saint Amant, here's the thing about Saint Amant is, Barb fans back from the late 90s and early 2000s, they'll remember those Saint Amant teams were always tough, hard nosed. They're going to come into Barb. They're not going to be scared of those guys, and they're going to compete. And they have two arms. They have two arms that can go in there and beat those guys. So Barb's going to have to come ready to play. And Coach Cicchini knows that. I'm not saying anything he already doesn't know. So.
Let's drop down to 3A now because 4A, unfortunately, no teams. We had DeRidder, Lagrange, both in the brackets. Unfortunately, Leesville as well. Unfortunately, none were able to advance to this round. So we'll drop down to 3A. We've got a pair of teams there. We'll start with the 6th seed Iowa, a team that has really kind of made a staple in the brackets over the last few years. They've been in these spots a heck of a lot. They'll take on Lutcher. The 3 seed Iowa comes in 19-12 in the regular season. Lutcher 25-9. So Iowa comes in the underdog, but I kind of just always feel like they whether or not they're the 1 seed or the 25th seed, they're going to view themselves as the underdog. It's really just the Yellow Jacket mentality.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up this game because that's actually a game I'm planning on going to, at least game 1, maybe tomorrow. Look, Iowa's got a tough matchup for sure. Lutcher, I feel like, is usually always in the state tournament or in the quarterfinal rounds in Class 3A year in and year out. They've got a really good program. They actually have one of, if not the best, freshman pitcher in the state of Louisiana in Marshall Loke, who was on that 2019 East Bank Little League World Series team that actually won the Little League World Series, first team from Louisiana to do so. So they'll run into a good arm from him. But, I think the interesting thing with Iowa is when you look at their schedule and the teams that they've played, they had a really good schedule, and they beat teams like Rose Pine, like Doyle, like Grand Lake, who's the number 1 seed in 1A, and Kinder. So, kudos to them for actually, scheduling, some tough games throughout the year to get them prepared for this. And like you said, I wouldn't be shocked if they played, the role of spoiler or upset again.
I really appreciate teams like like Iowa that go out and they'll just play good teams. They just want to play good teams, and they do so even without elite talent at the high end level. They don't have a ton of prospects that are going to LSU and Louisiana Tech and UL Lafayette. I think their top 2 ranked recruits you guys have, Colton LeBlue and Ross Dennison, both have been obviously huge for them, along with the likes of Landon Langley, who's a track star, a basketball star. We've seen him all over and what he's been able to do. Jacob Kershaw, who's an offensive lineman. Tyler Dartez, Alexander there. We mentioned LeBlue and Dennison. So obviously just a group of kids that just love playing baseball and love competing because it's not even just baseball. They play everything.
They play everything. That's what I was going to say. Colton LeBlue is the quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's a kid who does it all. And that's, you're right. That's how they all are. And, stuff like that early on in the season, scheduling those tougher opponents, it tends, I feel like, to pay off down the road. So I'd definitely be pulling for the Yellow Jackets for sure.
Then at the bottom of the bracket, we have the 2 seed Iota. We've seen what the Bulldogs have done in the past. It really feels like it's really been building towards this year. A lot of young guys are now seniors and have helped carry Iota to this point. 28-3 regular season at 3A level. They'll take on Erath, who actually came in with a losing record at 16-17, but it's the post-split playoffs, so it's not rare to see teams with losing records make playoff runs and what we've been able to do. But in this one, it's Iota at home. It's going to really be hard to knock off the Bulldogs and what they're able to do, obviously, with a guy like Tyler Jan there at the top with Arizona. And he's just the start of what those guys have been able to do. You kind of look at a guy like Nick Duplichin, the UNO commit. Iota's loaded and may end up actually being the most talented team there in Class 3A.
Yeah, I agree with you. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brady, but I feel like Iota, didn't they have a quote unquote disappointing finish to last season in the playoffs, right?
Right. They had played Iowa, and Iowa upset them in the quarterfinal round, which every team learns if you play Iowa in the playoffs before that Sulphur run, not normally going to go your way.
Not normally going to go well. So look, that 2022 class that were juniors last year, Lejeune, Nick Duplichin, they experienced probably that heartbreaking loss and not getting to the state tournament last year to try to win a state title. So I agree with you. I mean, a 3-loss Iota team, led by guys like Tyler Lejeune and Nick Duplichan. Yeah, I don't really see Erath stopping that train. I mean, I really like Iota to go to the state tournament, and I think if they get to the state tournament, they have a good shot to win it all. And like I said, I think the way it ended last year probably stings a bit for them, and they don't want to feel that again.
Yeah, I can imagine. Obviously, it was a 5-4 matchup, losing a 3-game series to Iowa there in the quarterfinals. A chance to kind of redeem themselves and realize that the seniors on this team were freshmen when they won it, or when they went, rather, back in 2018. Obviously, they didn't get a chance to win it, but they went to the championship game when they fell to Berwick, who was the 1 seed, so we could see kind of a rematch again this year if if chalk holds, so to speak.
Right.
Speaking of Iota, we mentioned Tyler Jan. We've Nicholas Duplichan there on the mound and what he's been able to do. Dawson Wallace, Andrew Mouton there. So really good Iota team. Maybe revenge on their mind, kind of trying to make up for the disappointing finish last year. Now, a team that didn't have a disappointing finish was what we saw from St. Louis a year ago in Division Two. Kind of ran it all the way there, the championship game, and it looks like that they're poised to kind of do the same. This is an absolutely loaded team of high school prospects. Um, Really only rivaled by Barb in the area in terms of the number of guys that they've got going at the next level. Guys like Ryan Barron, who's the 37th ranked prospect according to you guys, UL Lafayette commit, and that's as a senior. And then the 2023 class, their junior class, is loaded. Maybe the best junior class in the entire state of Louisiana. Guys like Jake LaRocca, Louisiana Tech commit, Reed Snyder, Louisiana Tech commit. Um, a lot of really good, talented players there for St. Louis, who comes in obviously a heavy favorite over De La Salle.
Right. Yeah. So I really like St. Louis as well. And I think whenever we did this last year, St. Louis had probably not even as good a record as they have this year and are not seeded as well as they are this year. But I remember us talking last year about, again, what Coach Fontenot did with his schedule before district is he really loaded it up with a bunch of top level, top notch competition and ended up paying off for St. Louis last year as they won the state title. And I think it's going to pay off again for them this year. You mentioned, yes, Ryan Barron, Jake LaRocca, Reed Snyder. You've also got a guy like James Rena, who every time I see play is, quote unquote, more than the sum of his parts. I mean, he just does everything right. He'll play at the college level. Jason Shamsey, another really good, solid player. And then St. Louis has some young players that are contributing as well. Like I know Kamani Poulard on the mound. So yeah, I really like St. Louis to advance past De La Salle, and then what that will most likely set up is another semifinal matchup with Vanderbilt Catholic.
All the names that you mentioned, and yet still names like Welsh and what he's been able to do, Barrett
Oh,
and Corville and Milligan and Evans. I mean, all these guys have contributed. This lineup is really deep. It's going to be hard for anyone. Honestly, I think that they could win every bracket. The 5A bracket would be the only bracket they would have a hard time winning, in my opinion. Maybe Division One, but
right.
that just shows you how elite this baseball team is.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're so right. They have so many guys that I forgot some of those guys. Aiden Welsh, I mean, the times I've seen him this year, I mean, he's
Yep.
just absolutely blistered, the baseball. And, a guy like Luke Corville has, earned himself a scholarship to Bossier Parish Community College, and Blake Evans is another guy who's performed really well. So, and of course, they're well coached. So, um, yeah, I like for St. Louis to advance and have a rematch with Vanderbilt, which means they'll see Owen Scheck-Snyder again, who was really good last year against St. Louis, but came up on the losing end of things.
For sure. And then obviously looking for that repeat there, something that St. Louis has done. They just repeated in tennis. They had a repeat champion in golf. They've repeated in basketball recently. They've repeated at girls track and field. So they're really the school of repeats over the last couple of years. We'll see if that trend continues for them. Uh, In 2A, we've only got one team, despite being a loaded 2A district that we have here. Teams like DeQuincy and Kinder, a lot of upsets for our local teams there in the second round that kind of kept us having a very light Class 2A quarterfinal. Only Rose Pine, but that is a pretty hefty team. Only Rose Pine's kind of an odd saying there, as Rose Pine 27-2, a dominant year for that company over there. They'll take on another power program in Class 2A. We've seen the Mangum Dragons win the state title over I covered their state championship. I think it was 2013 was the last time that they won. Ridge Heisler. He ended up pitching for Northwestern State and got them to the NCAA tournament back when they played at Oregon State a few years ago. So
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. Rose Pine, Mangum, quarterfinal round. Should be a fun one. Two very similar towns, and the feel of the towns as well. There's a lot to like about this series.
So yeah, with Rose Pine, last year they were that team that hadn't won a state title in school history. This year they've had the target on their back, throughout the entire season. And like you mentioned, they've gone 27-2. So they certainly answered the call, of being a team that can go and compete with anybody when their target's on their back. So I mentioned, I think we talked about earlier, Ethan Fry, who's committed to LSU as a catcher, who I think is number 3 overall in our 22 rankings. I actually saw him pitch earlier this year against Kinder. I'm not sure how much pitching he's been doing this year, but he was up to 92 miles an hour, spun a good breaking ball. He would be tough to beat in any classification right now from what I've seen. So, I think he'll do his thing against Mangum in one of those games. If they can piecemeal it together on the mound, they'll score enough runs, and they should be fine, but they'll have to come ready to play because, Mangum's a program that's had success.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of talked about what Mangum's been able to do in the past. Obviously, they've been at this stage before. They know what it kind of takes at every level, football and baseball. Even their softball program's been great. So they understand what that is, but obviously we mentioned Rose Pine and what they were able to do last year, man. Fry is such an ace in the hole because, pitcher is only something he can do. Like that's not even his thing. And so being able to have that weapon that, he can go out and throw a 3-hitter in the state championship game against the best team in the other best team in the state, such a clutch thing. But obviously guys like Brady Trolls, Jake Smith, Calcote, Grant Cody, and Fry gets all this attention. Jake Smith is ranked. He's the 22nd ranked player next year. He's going to Louisiana Tech. He's equally a really dominant high school player.
Oh, look, Jake, and again, when I saw him earlier this year, there was this fly ball hit down the left field line at Kinder in foul territory. There was a runner on first, so Jake was shaded up the middle, double play depth. And he ran all the way over and slid and dove and caught this ball. And I looked at somebody, I was like, that's what a Division I college shortstop's supposed to look like. Like they make those type of plays, right? And Jake came to our future games, which is our big event every summer at the Lake Point Sports Complex in Georgia, where it's nothing but the best uncommitted players from each state. And I mean, Jake did more than hold his own. He not only showed he was a good defender, but he can hit as well. And then the other guys you mentioned, Dakota and Troll, you're so right. They have the right pieces of the puzzle together. I think it worked in their favor that a lot of them were sophomores and juniors last year, and they've gotten back this year to make that, another run.
Let's drop to Class 1A, and we see two teams that have been in this spot before. Nothing new for these coaching staffs and these teams. But both kind of taking different routes to get here. We'll start with the 1 seed Grand Lake, a 19-16 year. They've had a pretty tough schedule with ultimately what they were able to play. This year, I think, was one of the tougher schedules that they've played in recent memory. Usually, they've been one of those teams that kind of played some B's and C's. They don't like to go above 1A. This year, they've played Iowa, Westlake, Welsh, Rose Pine. They've played really good teams to prepare them for these moments. So I really like the fact that they went out of their way, played a tough schedule. They're the 1 seed for a reason. Obviously, what they've been able to do a 19-16 year, 10-11 for Delta Charter. I really like Grand Lake to win this game. Realize that now we're in this territory. They're 1-game playoff games.
Right. And look, with Grand Lake, you've got the youngest David brother, right? Dylan David, another left-handed pitcher who I think's been, pretty darn good for Grand Lake, this year. And then you got a pair of junior twins, Gavin and Garrett Walker, who I think both pitch, play middle infield, kind of do it all. And then they actually, they have a senior right-handed pitcher, Keelan Broussard, who I know has some college offers to play at the next level. So I think Brady Grand Lake is another one of those teams that's kind of been on the cusp of winning that state title. It's like they're right there. They just got to take that last step and grab it. And, I hope for them that this year is the year. And I mean, I really think that they can do it. They have the team to do it.
Two runner-up finishes over the last 5 years in 2017 and again last year. Last year was that crazy semifinal where they had to cancel and stop in the middle, and then they started again. Obviously, still made it there to the championship game. They had lost to Oak Grove, who's still in the bracket, just on the other side, so they may be able to see him again, depending on what LaSalle, Haynesville, and company do there in that side. But obviously, before you can get there, a matchup there with Delta Charter. Then on the other side, or the other matchup there, they can meet in the semifinals. We've seen them already play twice. It's Oberlin. The Tigers have kind of upset East Beauregard. They've made a run up to this point to get here. They had to beat Ringgold in the first round. They upset East Beauregard. And yet they're hosting Logansport here in the quarterfinal round, the 4 seed. Obviously, we've seen what Manuel and company can do in the past because of what Oberlin was able to do. They won back in 2019, and so we've seen them win before. They had a huge first inning. Their bats can really get going. We've seen guys like Cade Manuel, Brett Bass. They both kind of started it. Now it goes in. Can you win another game? Realize they came in 9-15 record coming in. Logansport also the 4 seed with a 13-14. So two teams that have done a lot more, that have done more losing than winning this year, playing in the quarterfinal round.
Right, right. And when you look at two teams with records like that coming into, a game like this, getting hot at the right time, as we all know, is and maybe trumps everything at this, time of year. I mean, it's all about how you're playing from about the middle to end of April into early May, and that's all that really matters. And, like you mentioned, Oberlin's got a really good program. They've won before. It's a bunch of tough, hard-nosed, gritty kids. I like Oberlin's chances to move on. I really do.
For sure. And realize back in 2018, we saw Maryville. I don't know the history of everything, but I know for the first team that we've ever covered, they had a losing record coming in, and in fact won the state championship, and they still had a losing record on the year, and they didn't play 2A, 3A schools. They played 1A and below, so they played their peers and still had a losing record. But you mentioned getting hot at the right time. They had a couple of really good arms there at the top and was able to make a run. So we'll see if Oberlin may be able to kind of replicate that success there. But they'll have to get past a tough Logansport team there to do so. Now, let's drop down to Class B. You mentioned kind of a pedigree. How about Pitkin? Remember, this was a powerhouse in the 90s. They had 6 championships in the 90s. They took it off for a little bit. J.C. Holt, the former LSU player, has taken over the program as head coach, and because of it, they've really started clicking. They won they won their state title back in 2019. Now back in the quarterfinal rounds, just a win away from the semifinals. Guys like Connor Goldman, Jackson Perkins, Brock Nolan, Hunter Perkins there, Isaac Longino, all really good players. Perkins obviously a good pitching matchup there in the second round to beat another powerhouse in Elizabeth to get here. So taking the road less traveled for sure, but get another great program and another chance to make a run to the state title game with just 2 more wins left.
Yeah, and something, and this is a players' game, and it's all about the players. But it's funny is you bring up J.C. Holt, and I'm looking at my notes at all of these area teams, and you think about their head coaches. All of them have really good head coach. Like, there's no doubt there's a direct correlation between good coaching and being successful and having a successful year and a successful run in the playoffs. And I know that may sound dumb, but Pitkin, a storied program led by J.C. Holt now, playing good baseball at the right time. I like for them to move on in Class B.
Over the 1 seed. It's a tough ask taking on Quitman, but Quitman comes in 15-12. Pitkin has a 19-8 record, and they've played some good programs. But you heard it here. maybe an 8th seed in the quarterfinals, knocking off the 1 seed. It is baseball. 1 seeds aren't necessarily shoe-ins like they are in some other sports. So that would be fun to see. And then finally, Oberlin and Evans are obviously our 2 teams that have kind of taken. We mentioned the road less traveled. Yeah, I mean, when you're a 12 seed, even in Class C, where you've only had to win 1 game to get to this point, but it's still a tall ask. Evans won just 5 games in the regular season, 5-14, 6 wins now after their quarterfinal win. To get to this point over 5 seed Hackberry, another all Southwest Louisiana matchup. They'll take on the 4 seed Hornbeck, who comes in 8-11. Evans, a team that this isn't quite new territory, the quarterfinals, but semifinal, state championship, all would be kind of new territory for this company, for this team. Coach Edward DiTomaso there, and what they've been able to do could be huge. It's the chance that 1 win gets you there. Can they do it? Can you go on the road? They're at home, actually. Can they stay at home and down a tough Hornbeck team to be able to reach the stage?
Right. It's a big thing that they're at home for sure. And I think this is another case of, it really doesn't matter what your regular season looks like. If you start playing good baseball at the right time, that's all that matters. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that Evans team, if they can keep it going and, I'm sure this would be their first state tournament appearance.
Yeah, and for them, I think it's worth noting that their bats have been pretty big, and their wins this year, they've hung double digits numerous times against teams like Washington Marion and Starks. Obviously, Washington Marion, a much larger team than them in terms of in terms of size. So we've seen their bats go. So if their bats can continue to put up that type of run production, maybe they can pull the upset and be in the state tournament, and maybe make their first ever title game appearance. It's baseball. You never know. It's the beauty of the sport. So thank you, as always, for joining us, Alex. I'm glad that we kind of got to talk about these teams and kind of preview what their matchups look like and what we're expecting. Hopefully, a handful of teams in the hopefully more than a handful, maybe 2 handfuls of teams there in the semifinals in Sulphur next week. It would be a whole lot of fun.
Yep, absolutely. Appreciate it. It's fun as always, and I'm sure I'll see you out at McMurray Park next week.
For sure, we'll be there. When we've got this many teams there, we'll be there to cover our teams. Hopefully, cover a few state championships this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks, Alex.
Thanks.